really very painful to listen to my learned colleague on the other side, member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. This is a person who boastfully says, I chaired the National Security Council, so I know what it's like, I know what it's about. And he did that like for one day, because he was Prime Minister one day, and by the next day, the election was called. So it was painful to hear him standing there lecturing us of what we should do and should not do and how to do. You were there for 9 years, almost 10 years, and the crime escalated, a decade of murders, rampant crime in this country. And you were Minister of National Security, so I find it very difficult to take any advice from the member for Port of Spain South. And then he speaks, Honourable Attorney, Port of Spain, well, both of you, but I'll ease up south, okay? He is yet to speak in this chamber. I'll give him a blind. So the member for Port of Spain North tells us, where is the justification for extending? Somebody text me and said, like stick breaking somebody's ears. Because the Honourable Attorney General spoke in this chamber on this motion and gave the justification, gave the reasons why we were seeking to extend this particular state of emergency. But again, I can see where my friend is coming from, because he says a state of emergency is a last resort. That's the last thing you do. So they didn't do it. For 9 years they didn't do it, and just before an election, they called a state of emergency. The state of emergency was still in effect on the date when that person from Port of Spain North was sworn in as a Prime Minister. Still in effect. The date named for the election, the state of emergency ended April 13th. The election was called on 18th March. The member said, last resort, there's nothing after a state of emergency, and he's right. That's how he sees it, the member sees it. Nothing after a state of emergency. What did they do? They called a state of emergency. Shameless. Nothing after that. So what did you throw up your hands in the air and call election? That's what you did. And during a state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, the member speaking about the Commissioner of Police and so on, and I'll come back to that point. During that state of emergency, who did they lock up? They lock up the Commissioner of Police. Yes. The then Commissioner of Police was Earl Christopher. They locked up, instead of locking up criminals, they lock up the Commissioner of Police in the middle of a state of emergency. In the middle of a state of emergency. And then the member talked about the member for Barataria Sanwa dealing with regulations and at length. You know what you did on that side? When you call your state of emergency, you trespassed upon the office of the DPP. You gave yourselves powers that only the DPP constitution would have. That is what the member for Barataria Sanwa was at pains to point out. And I want us never to ever forget, it was under that member of parliament and those on the other side being in government, Minister of National Security, Port of Spain North, was under them. They came up with an idea, and so the members should be very aware what was happening in those prisons. Then, as Minister of National Security, member of Port of Spain North, what did he do? He took all the main kingpins and he put them in a building called Building 13. Building 13 in the maximum security prison. And what the Honourable AG shared with us earlier was happening is that all these kingpins coordinated, became a syndicate when you place them in that maximum security prison, Building 13. The member for Tunapuna will share with us what was happening in Building 13 when you thought you put all these kingpins, all these dangerous, put them to watch 65-inch TV. If we believe our member there, Minister Sturge, in that Building 13. So they put them there, and all the security things in the Building 13, they rip out everything. Remember what Tunapa told me that? He's nodding his head there now. They ripped out, the criminals ripped out everything in the building 13, that the building was no longer maximum security building.
Who was in charge?
And then the member for Port of Spain North, who talk and run, as they say. But I'm not done with him yet. It was under your watch. 5,000 persons were killed when they were in government, over 5,000. No state of emergency. Why did you call it then in your last month? Why did you wait till then? I had repeatedly asked for state of emergency because I knew what the member for Arima, when she spoke earlier, admitted, that when we had called the 2011 state of emergency, the crime went down. The member admitted that. The member for Arima further admitted that when that government, then in office, called the 2024 SOE, the crime went down. So they're very much aware that this is what happens. But then you did not put the safeguards. When we stood here to talk about your state of emergency, you did not put the safeguards in place. There were no safeguards. So what we've done, we see this SOE not as something to end crime, and I'll talk about that, some of the crime fighting strategies we have devised together with the National Security Council and the Commissioner of Police. We resorted to this state of emergency, not as just an attack on crime, Mr. Speaker. We call the state of emergency and make it very clear. The Attorney General and I, up to midnight on the 17th, Thursday the 17th of this month of July, we had a cabinet meeting. That meeting ended during the day, evening time. We then sat as members of the National Security Council. The Commissioner of Prisons advised, Commissioner of Police advised us of what the AG has shared with us, of what was happening, about this syndicate of like a criminal enterprise and their threats to national security and to specified officials in our government. When I say government, the other arm of government, that is the judiciary, DPP, and other arms operating against the police and so on. And he shared that brief with us, some of which has found its way in the newspapers. So we do, most of what was written in the paper is factual. Most of it's there. Those reports yesterday, those are facts of the situation. And after he shared that in the National Security Council, up to midnight on the 17th of July, we were still at the Diplomatic Center, together with the Commissioner of Police. And we decided, we took the decision. It was not the Commissioner advised, but I take full responsibility as the Prime Minister of this country. I advised the Attorney General, we both spoke, to do the legalese necessary and send it to Her Excellency the President to have the proclamation signed. We were on that phone. After I left the center, I think we got home. I got home about 1 or 1:30 a.m. on the 18th. Thereafter, we were on that phone throughout that night. The Minister of Homeland Security, the Honorable Attorney General, and myself, until the Commissioner of Police made the declaration. We were still awake. We were still conferring. We were still waiting for certain things to happen, because that proclamation took effect at midnight on the 17th. Sorry, the 18th. Midnight, well, 17th into 18th, yes. And therefore, the Commissioner put his troops together with the Defence Force, together with the prisons officers. Certain things had to happen. They had to extract people from the maximum security prison. I will call no names at the moment, Mr. Speaker. They were extracted and put into another location where they could be on lockdown, as it were. Because what was happening in that prison, based on the reports we received, was absolutely astonishing and frightening. And all of that arose because that member for Port of Spain North had placed all these gang leaders, all these top criminals in one room, building, all of them. And so they were conspiring, colluding together, coming together, as I say, a criminal enterprise from in the prison and then working with those outside the prison. Now, the member of Port of Spain North talked about don't scapegoat the prison officers. Well, I would like to say, if I had to choose a scapegoat, it would be that minister and his government for the past 9 years. 9 years. You allowed this to fester, for 9 years. So we call the state of emergency, as I said, not to treat with crime per se. It was prompted by the threat posed to the state by actors in prisons, and they were threatening our national security in this country. That's what the AG reminded us. This was not the plan to fight crime. And again, it is hypocrisy to stand here and shout from the rooftops to talk about where's the plan, where's the plan, where's the plan. You for 9 years had no plan, none whatsoever, no crime plan whatsoever. But I will share with you some of the strategies we have already put in place and others that we will be coming on stream. So I thank you again, Mr. Speaker, as I contribute on this motion. I say this targeted state of emergency proclaimed July 18th. It is not bluster. It is not theatre. It's the fulfillment of the promise we made when 3 months ago the people of TNT returned us to office with an overwhelming mandate to make our nation safer by action and not just by empty noise. We intend to keep that promise. This is but one piece of the plan that as we go forward to make our country safer. We plan to serve, we plan to protect firmly, Mr. Speaker, lawfully, decisively. No shortcuts, no politics, only duty. That is what we will do. So when it is that a violent minority throttles the freedoms of law-abiding citizens, we cannot hesitate. If we hesitate, we'll be abdicating our responsibility. The first duty of a government is to protect and serve its people. Because if you're dead, then you can't get good health care, you can't get roads, you can't get drains, you can't get all the goodies that people ask all the time for. Because first thing is you must be alive. And that is our first duty, to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to compliment today the members of the TTPS, the Commissioner of Police and his staff. I want to commend the CDS, Defense Force, the prison officers. As in everything else, there may be a few bad eggs, but I told you all once before, give us the hammer and we'll nail down the criminals. We'll nail down the bad eggs. We will nail them down and up, Mr. Speaker, but that is my first duty as your Prime Minister. Every other matter can be outsourced. In fact, the constitutional law is very clear that you cannot outsource keeping people safe. You can have, yes, we have private security firms and so on, but the first duty of any government is protection of its citizens. And we are committed to doing that. So when those on the opposite side, the last 3 years, we saw the highest murder rates in this country come to ask me today about where's your crime plan. The highest murder rates, 2022, 624, sorry, 2022, 605, 2024, 624. Whenever history tells us every single time the murder rate has crossed 500, it has been when those on the other side were in government. Every single time it's fact. So let us make sure there's no panic, there's only clarity, no division, unity of purpose, no cynicism, only constitutional resolve. So we have taken some steps, and they're up and down crying, and people suffering, and people starving, and they can't buy books, and they can't buy clothes, and wow. I want to talk a little bit about CPEP and URP, because I'll tell you why. The Commissioner in his statement and in his intelligence to us talked about the state-funded programs and for criminals. They're funding criminals. So a significant part of our anti-crime plan has been removed, to be removing the state, we're taking the steps from the process of funding criminal activity. It has been an open secret for decades under those on that side. The enormous rise in crime in the 2000s saw us move from 93 murders for the whole of 1999, 93, and then we got to 550 murders in 2008, and then it kept growing and growing to the 600s that I've just shared with you. There was a deadly explosion of more than 5 times the number of persons murdered per year in just 9 years. During those years, our country descended into becoming one of the most murderous countries on earth. We were on the top numbers, not for good things, but for murders. The massive spike in crime, kidnapping, did not happen because of poverty. That's not why it happened. It occurred, those years were the years of the oil boom, oil and gas boom, so there was plenty of money in the country. But that was a period when those on the other side established something called CPEP. And they worked with gang leaders. They referred to them as community leaders. You all remember that? Yes. They were community leaders. The gang leaders were called community leaders. Hundreds of millions of unaccounted for dollars were funneled into that program. That was when a notorious gang leader, you all will remember, please remember, in 2002 to 3, was appointed as URP National Advisor. Under their watch. Many academics, international journalists, and brave local journalists have extensively written about the link between state funding contracts and gang activity. As soon as we entered in office in 2025, this year, Mr. Speaker, my government went about the process of auditing, investigating, and dismantling these criminal networks with the gang leaders. CPEP had become a runaway horse, funding criminal activity under that administration. The program lost its moorings and became a financial burden on the state. Ghost employees, contractors aligned with active politicians, contractors tied to organized crime, politicians serving as directors of companies, collecting state funds. The program has been used to fund political activities through contractors and to feed organized crime elements, Mr. Speaker. And so this CPEP, the chickens today have come home to roost, because now there are claims by a CEO of CPEP, and he's on affidavit, that active politicians who were once in this position pressured, once we were in government, pressured CPEP to sign off on $1.4 billion expenditure. 3 days before the election, they signed up, tied the government to pay $1.4 billion in extended contracts to these CPEP contractors. And what happens with this? It continues to contribute to turf war, fighting, gang warfare, culture of ghosts at taxpayers' expense. So when they're all over, people crying and crying and they can't get food and they can't get anything. And then there are those who are telling me, if we shut these programs down, we will lose the election. Well, let me remind you, they extended everybody's contract in CPEP and URP and all those make-work programs. And what happened? They lost the election. Yes, that was signed just a few days before the election. And all those make-work programs, state-funded programs. And then it's not true when you say they're starving, because those workers are still being paid. They're still being paid as we speak. And if they're not being paid, then it's the contractors at the top who are keeping the monies that are given to these contractors to pay to the real workers. So the URP program has a more extensive history than CPEP. Created in the 1990s, succeeding something called DUDE and LID in those days, make-work programs, again under their watch. Notorious in the popular mind for their inefficiency, corruption, sexual abuse, and political patronage. Then came the CPEP program. So there's been a lot written about this, and it is astonishing, mind-boggling, of reports we are getting from all these make-work programs. So we are auditing them, Mr. Speaker. We are looking to see how we can help the most vulnerable in our society. We will not abandon them. That is part of our duty too. And to say that this will feed the gangs, will feed crime. So how many murders last year? 603. And you had CPEP, and you had URP, and you had all those programs, and still the murder rate went up. So that's under the PNM. That is under their governance. Mr. Speaker, we acted. There was a constitutional trigger. We pulled that trigger because there was an imminent threat to national security. So, as I said, Tuesday, July 17, cabinet meeting, thereafter national security meeting, we got the intelligence reports and we acted on it. We did not hesitate. We did not hesitate. So I want to make it very clear. When they speak of the Commissioner of Police and say the Commissioner of Police is not the one to announce the state of emergency, and he's not the one. We took the decision. I can bravely say I took that decision. Given what the Commissioner told us, based on the imminent threat, we took that decision. We did not hesitate. We did not hesitate. So why are you calling up the poor Commissioner name? That he should not be the one in the morning to make this statement. He gave the first statement after certain things had been done. Because after midnight, a lot of mobilization had to take place, a lot of things had to happen, and we could not have the risk that something happened before we acted, that we were out there out front before certain actions were taken to secure and make safer this land of ours. So that is what happened between midnight and 8 or 9 the next morning. So we have a targeted state of emergency, and we say no curfew. At the moment, that is the advice we have, and we are acting on it. It is not necessary for the curfew. So people can continue with their lives. The member spoke about constraints on your constitutional rights to freedom and whatever. Last time I went to the Emancipation Village, and I was very pleased to see so many people there, that your normal life is not disrupted. When? With the curfew, you don't have a balance. You will not be able to go to church in the evenings, for example. You have a curfew time. You will not be able to go, as I say, Emancipation Village this week. And let me congratulate the Minister of Culture, working with the Emancipation Support Committee for great showing. And I will take this opportunity, I know, just to express happy Emancipation greetings to everyone. So we were there, and we said curfew will shut down most of the rights and privileges that you have. What this SOE gives us, however, it gives to the police, the TTPS and other law enforcement officers some stronger tools to be able to deal with the criminals in our land. So the choice was very clear. We had to move before more blood was spilled, and we chose prevention, and we declared it. Now, what is this state of emergency is, and what it is not? It is short, sharp constitutional tool. It is a precision search to sever prison to street command lines. It is a focused operation with clearly defined objectives. It is rights respecting. Normal life continues, as I said before, for the law abiding. It is not a blanket, as I said, no curfew. It's not a license for harassment or abuse. And the question people are asking, well, when and how will this SOE end? How and when it ends? The regulations shall have effect during the period of the public emergency, no longer. The SOE lapses or ends early. Once, on the advice of the Commissioner of Police, we will act accordingly based on further reports. We get daily reports from the TTPS. So, we neutralize or lock down key command targets. We break prison to street communication. The illegal devices taper off, so we see these things are happening. We hit agreed gun and dirty money seizure benchmarks. I think Minister of Homeland Security has some of those statistics that Minister may share with you. We identify and act against colluding insiders. And if the threat persists and an extension is truly necessary, we will return to the House. But if on the metrics that we get, the matters that we are concerned with taper off, then we will not keep the state of emergency going. I want to share with you now some of the plans. The Commissioner, when the Commissioner came into office fairly recently, I think it's the first time in years you have a Commissioner who was not politically manipulated to be there. He acted in accordance with the law. Okay, yeah. First time. We didn't go and pull any merit list from anybody at President's house. We didn't lock up a commissioner of police. Differently, we followed the law, top of the merit list. We went with that person as the commissioner of police. And when that commissioner came into office, he shared with us some of his a very strategic vision document. He shared that with the Minister of Homeland Security, and that was shared with us in the cabinet, because many of the things proposed to be done will have to get governmental approval, of course, and the resources. So I will just give some of the headings. There are some parts that it will not be appropriate to talk about in terms of a crime plan or anti-crime plan, as the case may be. So there will be things such as operational efficiency and leadership development. There will be an internal audit and organizational assessment undertaken to conduct a comprehensive internal audit to identify operational challenges, manpower constraints, resource distribution inefficiencies, and organizational culture gaps. Of course, the convening of leadership meetings with divisional commanders to evaluate crime trends, enforcement effectiveness, and regional policing concerns. And of course, the alignment of the TTPS strategic objectives with government's vision through collaboration with the National Security Council. Also, leadership training and professional development, structural and policy reform initiatives. I will not give all the details of this, time will not permit, but we do have a strategic plan as put forward by the Commissioner. Accountability and monitoring mechanisms, community engagement and police legitimacy. We will restore the community comfort patrols again. We'll expand community-based policing strategies, institutionalize public safety advisory and educational programs, strategic transparency and monitoring mechanisms, and some crime reduction strategies, strengthen investigative units with advanced forensic tools and surveillance capabilities, implement rapid response strike teams focused on high-priority criminal offenses, including firearms, trafficking, kidnappings, and gang violence, expand divisional crime analysis units to proactively map crime trends and guide enforcement strategies. Of course, there will also be a legislative agenda, and right now we are very much engaged in throughout the country in having what we refer to as stand your ground legislation that we want to bring to the Parliament when we reconvene in September, so that those consultations are taking place. And if I may, to the Honourable Member for Arima, I saw one of your members complaining that they have not got a copy of the proposed legislation. But I was glad by my Minister of Justice that a copy had been sent to the Honourable Member for Arima, so perhaps you may want to share it with your colleagues. So legislative, that's just one. There are several others that we have spoken about before. So we'll have the legislative agenda as well. Electronic monitoring of offenders, judicial cooperation framework, advocate for legal reforms that streamline prosecution processes and enhance judicial efficiency in handling repeat offenders. Intelligence-led crime prevention, again, several things under this heading. Contingency planning for high-risk crime trends. Technology and intelligence integration. Multi-agency intelligence collaboration. Cybersecurity and digital crime investigation. Technology integration, monitoring and adaptation. Strategic resource allocation and organizational optimization. Manpower expansion, we have already begun that. We started with the absorption of the 800 SRPs to make up more numbers in the force. And before that, for the fire services, we had absorbed some SRPs in the fire. Auxiliary fire officers have been incorporated. So resource allocation, we're going into budget when we return. Minister of Finance and Minister of Planning are both engaged with that, with the various ministries. And it is our intention to see how best we can resource the Ministry of National Security, the TTPS, the Defence Force, and the prisons to give them the resources that they need to be able to combat and fight the crime in our country. A lot of the CCTV cameras, Mr. Speaker, they're not working. Yes?
Unless you wish to avail yourself of the 15 minutes.
Thank you, yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Yes. So whilst we may have these CCTV cameras all over, many of them, they're not working. And if they are working, they cannot even read a number plate. They can't read the numbers. So I know Minister Munilal in the last session of Parliament spent a lot of time asking the Minister for, then Minister Hines and Minister for Port of Spain North about these CCTV cameras, and you could never get a clear answer. We're not sure what's happening. This one time it was said it was 2 years and they were waiting to get them. Did they order them? Did they not order them? Those cameras were like ghosts as well. And all the ghost gangs, they had ghost cameras. So we have to get. Another, what we want to do is we want to place the NOC, the National Operations Center. You know, it was under my watch we established that, and I must thank Captain Gary Griffith, who was then with us. Yes. We established a National Operations Center. My plan is for us to put that NOC under the command of the TTPS. What is happening with it now, you have all these nice big screens all up on a wall, all around you. You can see the whole country with cameras that are working. Sorry? 65-inch. But they're working cameras. But then the persons are there are not equipped or staffed to use what you're seeing. So the officers who are there don't have that collaboration as they should have with the TTPS. But if it were the TTPS and you spot something is happening, you get the intel in the NOC, something is happening, you can deploy right away back to headquarters. You can send police officers outside. This is what I discovered. The uncoming officer, the NOC is now manned by SSA officers, and they just sit and look at it because they don't have a cadre. They don't have troops that they can deploy to go out and deal with something that they pick up or see on the screen. So that is something we are working on. We will review that as well, that NOC. We will do a tactical firearms allocation and readiness. We have to look at overtime optimization, overtime management, and budget optimization. Oh, I skipped URP, okay. My colleagues reminded me, in addition to the ghosts in the CPEP, you have the ghosts in the URP, and they're also used for funding criminal enterprises. Talking about border security, tactical intelligence operations, monitoring and accountability frameworks, contingency planning, and adaptive strategies. This strategic master plan, as I say, was presented by the Commissioner of Police. There are far more details that I would not want to disclose at this time, but of course we'll be rolling out some of these strategies in the coming days, weeks, and months. It provides a comprehensive, structured, and adaptable roadmap for TTPS to achieve operational excellence, crime reduction, enhance public trust, and resource organization. Through strategic alignment across leadership development, community engagement, crime suppression, technology integration, and resource allocation, the plan establishes a modernized, intelligence-driven policing framework capable of addressing evolving security challenges. The intention is to incorporate data-driven enforcement, multi-agency collaboration, legislative advocacy, and transparency initiatives. Thereby, the TTPS can strengthen police legitimacy, enhance investigative efficiency, and foster stronger community relations. The plan emphasizes measurable outcomes, ensuring crime suppression efforts are systematic, sustainable, and adaptable to future security dynamics. These are just some of the small points when we come to deal with how we plan to address crime. So this SOE was not to deal with the crime throughout the whole length and breadth of the land. It came about because of threat, a real threat to public security in Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, unfortunately, Port of Spain North disappeared again. Port of Spain North, he says, SOE is the last resort. There's nothing left. I want to give you the assurance that after this SOE, there will be everything left in place in Trinidad and Tobago. Everything will still be here. So we must use it as best as we can. We have to use it as best as we can.